Okay, so these are English muffins ready to bake today. We're pulling a bunch of bread and we're about to load up the ovens. Without further ado, I just wanted to say it's fun kind of to work as a team, and it's fun to work in a space that's you can kind of remain focused for an extended period of time. So first load of the day, damper is closed. And making sure the other half doesn't lock the door open as I load it with the next set of bread. So I'm gonna go ahead and start scoring the next bunch. When working with a partner, basically we both can be scoring, and this essentially allows us the opportunity to keep pace with the oven but still do something artful with our bread. Again, I could probably operate this oven solo or have Emerald operate this oven solo. In doing so, there's some disadvantages. The sort of reloading of the oven is clunkier. Even in talking with folks that have baked on similar ovens, oftentimes you'll unload the whole oven and then move into your next cycle of bread. I think we can hope as a pair operating the oven to reload after round one relatively quickly, to the point that none of the decks really get to rest very much in between. And in that way, I'm trying to find like a happy medium between being able to stay artistic on bread, but stay efficient with the equipment that we have and not spend twice the amount of time necessary baking bread. And that's not because I don't like baking bread or spending a lot of time at the oven, it's just because there's a lot to do. See, I have beautiful designs on all of these now, and there's no question that as fast as I would want to try to move, I could not have reloaded this loader any quicker and moved on to the next deck. All right, setting that first timer there. We're already done with an entire rack of bread and moving on to another. I think we should probably roll up 2 racks.
You say you wanted to grab one more?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go get that one. So with these ones that are, you want me to start clearing off the bannetons and putting the boards away to clear up the speed racks as we're emptying them?
Yes, we can just put the boards back on there. Wow, almost forgot to score 1. So what's nice is working in a pair in this particular role here at the oven, I can alter my actions appropriately based on where my partner is in the process. So if they are working really far ahead, then I can just pull the stuff that they've already scored, or I can choose to score on my own as a means of allowing them to get a little further ahead. So now as we're kind of getting close to the completion of the first round of the oven, I'm probably going to score a few more sets so that Emerald can start creating a little bit of a stockpile for round 2. I basically want to be able to reload the oven very quickly, and in order to do so, I want to have some ready to go to reload. Right now, I'm about 22 minutes away from the first moment where an oven is going to be ready to reload. The ones that aren't really getting any kind of ornamental scoring, they're basically going to be sorted out to be sliced sourdough. It's one of our most popular items. I guess as disappointed as I am to say this, our most popular bread. If I had to vote on what should be the most popular bread, if I could sort of will it on the people, would be the whole sourdough, because I think it preserves the crust and the sort of texture that we're trying to bake with. But a lot of people do not have bread knives at home that are easy to work with, and then other people in general just don't like the idea of having to cut bread. So sliced sourdough is easy to work with. You can stick it right in the freezer. You can pull out slices as you need them. Since we're baking both whole and sliced, we can use this sort of flow with this oven in our favor, because I have plenty of sliced. I don't mind slicing one of the pretty loaves, but I really don't need to, because by the time it's sliced in the bag and eaten in tiny slice segments, the artful scoring kind of gets lost along the way. So my English muffin deck was calling me. I also have been in this kind of workflow where, since we're kind of regularly baking English muffins, we've been keeping them in the bottom deck, which requires some service at this point for the steam generators, which never kind of worked properly in it. I've been waiting to do that, but I'm not losing the function of the deck, because we bake so many English muffins a week that I've basically just reserved that deck for English muffin baking. English muffins traditionally bake on a flat top. So what I'm doing is putting the oven setting at 100% heat coming from the bottom, with none of the heat coming from the top. It's crazy to think about this place as an empty hall with chandeliers and market bread shelves, like we had it on Thanksgiving. But it's true, we've been investing in this property now for a year. And we have the grocery store next door, which has become a part of our identity. It's kind of strange to think about a time where we didn't have some of our leaders, some of our admin leaders working just at the grocery store in the back at their desks. So even though it's been an incredibly short period of time in the grand scheme of things, and even though we've had to construct kind of in a way that felt rushed, it's been nice, because we were doing a ton of things along the way at the garage to kind of prepare for this moment in the background. Not always with the greatest success, but when we were working all together in the garage, we had been thinking about what kind of rhythm we would want to incorporate in our production life in a commercial setting. So the idea that we typically start at the ovens or start on the mixer, and then kind of work our way together as a group on the table for shaping bread and pastries throughout the day. That's something that we pretty much carried over from our past experience. And so I think the flow of the day is still intentionally similar, albeit this place still feels just enough foreign to be just like the garage, because the garage never really felt completely done in any way. It was always changing I imagine this place will reach equilibrium in the short term, whereas in the garage, I think everybody who worked there sort of expected that equilibrium does not exist in this space.
Yeah, after I had kind of finished what I was saying, that was what I started thinking about next is, you know, I'm at 2 years with proof now, and I'm just used to the perpetual change and construction and all of that. So when there's a change happening, it's just par for the course. That's just how it's always been. You know, I was there before the RV garage, when the floors were all torn up.
Emerald was around when we lost a team member who simply, I think by the end was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I can barely move around here. You guys are constructing all around and, you know, leaving 18 inches of workspace. That was just our reality for a little while.
And all the fridges were the reach-ins, and we had to carry board by board to the oven to bake.
My morning used to start with going out to our old decommissioned box truck in my backyard, which was like flour storage.
Oh yeah. Or the 6 hours I would spend on a Friday morning retreading everything before I could even start setting up the speed racks to proof. So all that to say is that change is very much part of the norm. So I think when things stop changing, that'll be more jarring than anything else.
Okay, so now I'm basically in an unload cycle because my oven's fully loaded. So Emerald's goal right now is to get as far ahead before this next round as she can. I'm not gonna keep scoring because I'm only minutes from the first oven being completed. I've got my second round of English muffins in, which is great. I've got kind of bottom up, you can see the gradient effect of the bake. The top loaves are just beginning. The second level there, which we're now calling deck 2, is pretty young still in its bake. You can see that it's gotten most of its oven spring, but the loaves are still very light in color. As you go down, you start to see a little bit of color developing in the middle deck. And if you take a peek at this fourth deck, there's even more color developing across the loaves. Our sourdough today is actually being baked with a slightly different flour composition than normal. It is a white Sonora blend that we're using today, which is a heritage grain known to Arizona. Typically we use a blend that includes white Sonora but has other heritage grains in it. We had run out of that flour just before our redelivery, so we switched to our kind of secondary sourdough blend when that happens. This flour is significantly lighter in color. The white Sonora whole grain looks very close to white flour despite being a heritage grain. It's just a naturally light grain. When judging the final color of these loaves, I have to sort of keep in mind that this bread wants to be lighter in color than the typical sourdough loaves that we bake. And that's kind of an important consideration that I don't think anybody ever really talks about. It's the fact that, yes, I control the degree of how dark, bread bakes, but I'm trying to get a full and complete bake all around the loaf. And some grains color a little bit differently as they bake than others. The white Sonora colors a little bit less, so it takes longer to achieve deeper browns. Because it takes longer, that means the sides will end up fully finishing and developing a nice crust before the top is, a little bit darker. The closer you get to the roof of the oven, the darker the bread's going to be. It bakes kind of in a gradient effect. So that line that we score is often actually like a line of a little bit of char, because it gets closer to the actual heating element in the oven, which is, there's heating elements below the stones, and then there's heating elements above on the ceiling of each deck. So with that said, I'm looking at the side color often to judge when to pull the loaf. I know that it's hit the internal temperature. You know, like when you first start baking, you're like prodding a loaf with a thermometer like this and making sure that you achieved an internal temperature. After you've achieved the proper internal temperature 1,000 times out of 1,000, you sort of stop measuring each one, because you can also just tell. I don't know how to say that any other way, but if I get an underbaked loaf, I'll immediately feel it as I'm handling it post-bake. They feel dense on the inside, and you can literally kind of feel that density as you're holding it. So we more just looking to complete the loaf, and yes, we intentionally bake a little bit darker because I don't like to pull the loaves of bread where the side of it is completely white as snow and the top of it has just the lightest brown, and if I cut it, it cuts as though it's the inside of a loaf. Believe it or not, actually, the most traditional form of this bread would have baked even darker, to the point that the outer crust of the bread would have been pretty much all charred. And the reason being is that traditionally bakers baked really, really, really large loaves. This loaf, sometimes people come in and say, oh, that's too much bread for me. It's kind of almost a funny statement on a historical context, because people used to buy these giant rounds of bread for several weeks of eating. And why would you buy bread for several weeks of eating? Well, primarily because you wouldn't go and venture to the market to buy it more than every few weeks on horseback or walking potentially a great distance away. So, you know, if you think about life just prior to these modern times, you would have wanted to buy bread for a little bit longer than a few days. So we baked really, really large loaves, and in order for the inside of that loaf to be fully done, you had to bake the outside longer. People actually chipped away at the crust and ate the inside. So I can't actually really say anything about the people that hate crusts. Like, if you hate crusts, all I can say is, like, deal with the fact that we have a crust, and, you know, bring out your hammer and chisel. You would be welcome in history eating bread that way. And that's all I have to say to anyone who says that my bread is too dark. The inside is perfectly light.
You should see how dark we want to bake it.
Yeah.
Instead of constantly discussing the happy medium between what we like and what people like.
Everything I'd done prior, like, tried to explain some sort of version of computer work to your grandma, and it's just very difficult. But when it comes to bread making, we can draw a history line all the way back to prehistoric times, and it's sort of fascinating. It's something that we've been doing for a long time. All right. Also, the white Sonora yields larger loaves outwardly, even though we scale them to the same weight. It just, like, puffs up more. So I made sure to prop up the oven glass on the way out. All right, now I'm going to unload the other half. And because I have the benefit of a partner, we can get this bread out of here, and I still have plenty of time to get to the next deck. And then can you push up that rack closer? So I've got a couple things that I do need to get to quickly here. I set my English muffin timer a minute early on purpose, giving me a little bit of a buffer. And so I know I have a minute of freedom. That's the timer that just went off in the background. And I have plenty of scored bread, so Emerald's gonna keep getting ahead of the game so that as these ovens complete, we can essentially immediately reload them. And lucky for me, just reloading the same exact deck. The loader's already configured on. Hit the steam. So far, my oven really has not been empty yet. Now I'm gonna go straight to unloading English muffins, and straight from there to unloading the middle deck. This is that first English muffin flip. Pretty happy with that color. That's just a steam release. Pretty easy reset there. Still battling some like fine tuning around the bakery. This week we were still playing with the hydration of our sourdough starter, which also meant that the hydration got altered on some of our doughs. I think the English muffins are a little wetter this week. Reloading that one. Unloading this side. Yes, these are really hot if you're wondering. The key is to go quick and really minimize contact. When they're harder to flip, that creates a secondary challenge. Really not my favorite when they stick.
Ooh, color is nice.
Just right. This pretty leaf. Two pretty leaves. You sorting sliced
Yeah.
onto that one row? It's all destined to be our sliced sourdough going into market this weekend. We're gonna sell some of it to customers that walk through the door in a couple hours. But the rest of it's all going to cool enough to slice just before being loaded up on the delivery truck for farmers markets.
Look at that steam.
Today went smoother than last week, right?
That was quick. I feel like we had a good flow.
I don't even know what time it is. The lack of a clock in here is strange.
9:19.
So it's like 2 hours, maybe?
Probably a little less considering we spent a good amount of time before we started.
Yeah, not baking.
Roughly half an hour just getting situated.
This oven has a cool little catch at the very end, so you can sweep right into the catch, and it's like a disappearing act. The oven ash is still there, and it does need to be vacuumed out, but not right away, which is nice.
They turn into these little charcoal bricks.
Why is there a pile of rags on our tile floor?
The ambiance.
It's not something I'm really thrilled about. This little drain pan came with the oven, and it overflows, and it's meant to go to this copper line, which is angled downward so that it basically drains out of the facility. And originally, this was a threaded piece of copper that was supposed to be screwed onto this, an end tip here. And the original plumber forgot to screw on the threaded component. And so it was just kind of hanging here. So then I asked the plumber to come back, and the solution would have required them to cut the pipe, then thread it in, then put a coupling and solder both ends of that coupling. I don't know if they just didn't bring their soldering equipment on that day or what, but instead they basically put a piece of PVC here and then used some sort of like a blue putty to glue it all together. And they covered it all back up with this metal and texted me I wasn't here and said it's done. And for a couple days, nothing was leaking. And so I took them at their word and I didn't disassemble all this to take a look right away. And then all of a sudden the leak comes back. We're all wondering, what the heck? How did this happen? And we open it back up. The PVC that was in between just sort of like fell because it was all melty anyway. And now we're kind of back to square one. So, you know, that's just the reality.